A tennis commentator who has watched thousands of matches just lost his composure on live television. Not because of a scandal, not because of a controversy, because of a 21-year-old from a country that has never produced a single top-level women's tennis player in its entire history. Greg Rusedski has stood courtside for Grand Slam finals. He has watched legends win and legends collapse under pressure. Very little surprises him anymore. So when he leaned into the microphone after this match and could barely find the words, something was different. Here is the question that should stop you right now. What actually happened on that court to make a man like that lose control of his own voice on air? Because this was not just a win. This was not just an upset on a stat sheet somewhere. This was Alexandra Eala, ranked outside the top 30, standing across the net from the defending Wimbledon champion, and doing something that statistically should not have happened. I am not going to tell you what happened yet, not the score, not the details, not what Rusedski actually said, because to understand why a hardened commentator reacted the way he did, you first need to understand who this player really is, and what she had to survive just to be standing on that court in the first place. This is not a highlight reel story. This is not one lucky afternoon. This is a story that starts years earlier, in a country where tennis barely registers as a sport, with a girl who had absolutely no blueprint to follow. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what Rusedski heard in his own head in that moment. You will understand why he could not stop talking about her afterward, in interviews, on radio, anywhere someone would listen. And you will understand why this single match might be remembered as the moment everything changed, not just for one player, but for an entire country that had never had a reason to believe this was possible. But first, we have to go back to where nobody was watching at all. Let's talk about why this actually matters. Because context is everything here. The Philippines has never had a woman crack the top 100 in the WTA rankings. Not once. In the entire history of the tour. Basketball owns the national obsession there. Boxing has its own legend in Manny Pacquiao. Tennis has always been an afterthought, a sport with almost no infrastructure and almost no path to the top. So when a 13-year-old girl from Manila got on a plane to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain, she was not following in anyone's footsteps. There were no footsteps to follow. No Filipina before her had done what she was attempting to do. If she failed, there was no precedent that said someone else had tried this and figured it out eventually. She was the precedent, whether she wanted to be or not. Think about what that actually means for a kid that age. 13 years old, barely any Spanish, no one she knew at the academy, and carrying, without ever asking for it, the weight of being the first person from her country to even attempt this level of the sport. Before any of that, she was just a kid who loved the game in the simplest way possible. She has talked about training with her brother and her grandfather after school, back when the biggest concerns in her world were her shoes lighting up and her socks having the right kind of ruffle. That version of her, the one that existed before academies and rankings and pressure, is the one that got on that plane anyway. Here is a number worth sitting with. Before her breakthrough at the majors, Eala had never advanced past the second round of a single Grand Slam tournament in her career. Not one. Every time the tennis world's biggest stages came around, she went home early. That is not a knock on her talent. It is a fact that made the ceiling above her feel very real and very low. And here is the part that makes this even heavier. Training at an academy that carries the Nadal name means every result gets measured against a standard she never chose. Win. And people say the system works. Lose. And people quietly wonder if she will ever break through at all. That kind of scrutiny does not disappear when practice ends. It follows you home. It follows you into every early morning session when nobody else is watching. So by the time she walked onto center court at Wimbledon this year, she was not just facing a Grand Slam champion across the net. She was facing years of a ceiling that had never been broken, in a sport her country had never conquered, carrying a name that demanded results she had not yet delivered on the biggest stages. If Greg Rusedski was going to lose his composure over anything, it was not going to be over an easy story. It was going to be over someone who had every reason in the world to fail, and somehow did not. Because what happened next did not just break a ceiling, it shattered one that had stood for her entire career. Let's go inside that match, because the deeper you look, the stranger this story gets. The first layer is the opponent herself. This was not some overmatched seed ripe for an upset. This was the defending Wimbledon champion, a 6-time Grand Slam winner, someone who had already proven she knew exactly how to close out big matches on this exact court. On paper, this was not a 50-50 match. It was not even close to one. So how does a player who had never gotten past round 2 of a major suddenly find a way past someone at that level? Here is the second layer, and it gets stranger. The first set alone stretched into one of the longest tiebreaks of the entire tournament. 7 points was not enough to decide it. Not 9. It kept going, back and forth, neither player willing to give the other an inch. In moments like that, experience is supposed to win. The player who has been there before, who has closed out tight sets on big stages again and again, is supposed to have the edge. Eala had never been there before. Not at this level. Not against this opponent, on this court, with this much on the line. So why didn't the pressure break her the way it has broken so many other young players in that exact same spot? Here is the third layer, and this is where it gets almost uncomfortable to explain. Eala has never been known as a big server. In a sport where raw power on serve often decides matches before they really begin, this was supposed to be her most obvious weakness. Scouts saw it. Coaches saw it. It is one of the quiet reasons she was never considered a real threat to the players at the very top. And yet here she was, on the biggest stage of her career, using that exact same serve against one of the best returners in the world. Think about what that means for a second. The one tool everyone assumed would fail her under pressure is the one she brought into the most pressure-filled match of her life. That is not a small detail. That is a player either walking into a disaster or building towards something nobody had bothered to understand yet. By the time the first set tiebreak finally ended, in Eala's favor, the tennis world had already started to notice something was different about this match. But nobody yet understood why. The commentators were still searching for an explanation that made sense with everything they thought they knew about this matchup. Because on paper, none of this should have been happening. A player with an inexperienced record at majors, a supposed weakness on serve, standing across the net from a defending champion in the biggest tiebreak of the tournament. If you had shown someone the stats sheet before this match started, almost nobody would have predicted what was coming next. The pieces did not fit together. Not yet. And that confusion is exactly what was about to explode into the reaction that made Greg Rusedski lose his composure on live television. Here is where everything you just heard needs to get turned inside out. Because the story so far sounds like a fluke. A young player somehow surviving a tiebreak she had no business winning against a champion on a court she had never conquered before. That is the surface-level version. But look closer at what actually happened, and the entire picture flips. Everyone watching assumed Eala's lack of a big serve was the thing she had to overcome that day. The weakness she was somehow managing to hide well enough to survive. But here is the detail that changes everything. After the match, Iga Swiatek herself was asked directly about that serve. And she did not call it weak. She called it one of the hardest things she dealt with all tournament. Read that again. The defending champion, someone who has faced the most powerful servers in the world, said a slower serve gave her more trouble than a fast one. Not because it lacked power, because it forced her into a completely different rhythm. One her instincts were not built to handle. Sit with that for a second. The exact thing everyone assumed was Eala's biggest liability was the thing that took apart a 6-time Grand Slam champion from the inside. That is not luck. That is not a fluke tiebreak. That is a weapon disguised as a weakness. And almost nobody in tennis had bothered to look at it that way until that exact moment. I want to hear what you think about that, because this is where the story stops being about one match and becomes something bigger. Drop a comment and tell me, Do you think being underestimated for years actually built this weapon? Or do you think Eala would have gotten here faster if people had taken her seriously sooner? I am genuinely curious which side of that debate you land on, because even inside the sport, people are still arguing about it. Now here is why Greg Rusedski could not stop talking. He was not just reacting to a score. He has spent his entire post-playing career analyzing exactly this kind of detail, the small technical choices that separate players who survive big moments from players who do not. When he watched Eala's serve dismantle a champion in real time, he was not seeing an upset. He was seeing a completely different blueprint for how to win at the highest level of the sport, one built on precision instead of power. That is the twist. The ceiling that had followed Eala through every previous Grand Slam was not broken by her getting stronger or faster. It was broken by the tennis world finally seeing the one part of her game it had spent years dismissing. But one interview, one reaction, is still just one data point. If this theory is actually true, if that serve is a real weapon and not a one-match miracle, the proof has to show up somewhere else too. And it does. In numbers that are even harder to explain away. Let's put this theory through a real test, because one champion's comment after one match is not enough proof on its own. Here is the first number. In that Wimbledon win, Eala won 55% of her second serve points against Swiatek. In tennis, that number alone is considered strong for any player at any level. For someone the sport had spent years labeling as an underpowered server, it is not just strong, it is proof that the pattern everyone assumed about her game was simply wrong. Here is the second number, and this one connects everything together. Since her breakthrough run began, Eala has built a record of 7 wins against 4 losses versus top 10 opponents. 7-4. That is not one lucky tiebreak against one champion. That is a pattern across multiple tournaments, multiple surfaces, multiple styles of returner, all facing the exact same serve that was supposedly her biggest flaw. Let's connect this back to where we started. Remember the question from the very beginning. What actually happened on that court to make a hardened commentator lose control of his own voice on live television? Here is the answer hiding in these numbers. Rusedski was not reacting to a surprising upset from an underdog who got lucky once. He was reacting to a player who had quietly built a repeatable weapon out of the exact thing everyone told her to fix, and was now proving it worked against the best players alive, match after match. And here is a detail almost nobody has connected until now. This win pushed Eala to become the first player from the Philippines in history, not the first woman, the first player period, male or female, to reach the second week of a Grand Slam. Think about what that means combined with everything else. A country with zero tradition at this level. A serve everyone assumed was a weakness. A commentator who has seen it all, unable to find the words fast enough. None of these are separate stories. The years in empty stadiums where nobody was paying attention. The serve that got dismissed instead of studied. The 7-4 record against the very best in the world. Rusedski's reaction on live television. They are all describing the exact same thing, from different angles, and they all point to one conclusion that the tennis world is only just starting to accept. The player everyone underestimated for years did not get lucky once. She built something real, in silence, while nobody was watching closely enough to notice. So let's go back to the question that started this video. What actually made Greg Rusedski lose his composure on live television that day? The answer is simple now. He was not watching a surprising upset. He was watching proof. Proof that a serve everyone dismissed for years was never a weakness at all. Proof that a country with zero tradition at the top of this sport could still produce someone capable of beating a 6-time Grand Slam champion on the biggest stage in tennis. Proof that being underestimated does not break a player. Sometimes it builds exactly the kind of weapon nobody sees coming until it is too late to stop. Eala did not get past that ceiling by getting louder or faster or more powerful. She got past it by being patient enough to let the one thing everyone doubted about her finally speak for itself on the court that matters more than any other in tennis. Here is what that means going forward. She is heading into the hard-court swing now toward the U.S. Open, on American soil, in front of American crowds who are only just learning her name. The element of surprise that carried her through Wimbledon will not be there anymore. Every opponent she faces from here on will study that serve. They will prepare for it specifically. The next chapter is not about sneaking past anyone. It is about whether what she built can still work when everyone already knows exactly what is coming. That is the real question nobody can answer yet. What happens to a weapon once the whole world is watching for it? If one match at Wimbledon was enough to make a former Grand Slam finalist lose his composure on live television, imagine what happens if she keeps proving this theory right in front of American crowds at the tournament that closes out the entire season. I do not think this story is finished. I think we are still in the opening chapters of it. So if you want to see exactly how this plays out, from Washington to Toronto to Cincinnati to the US Open itself, this is the channel that is going to track every single step of it. Subscribe now, because the next time Alex Eala walks onto a court, you are going to want to already know exactly what everyone else is only just starting to figure out.